Welcome, one and all cinephiles, to Critical Mess, a podcast where three dudes in the ad business discuss movies that critics and audiences don't agree on. I'm Nick Honeywell, along with my distinguished co-hosts here, Griswold, otherwise known as Andrew, and Mr. Brian McCullough. We also have producer Ben again this week, so we're very excited. So instead of introductions, guys, this week, I've got a quick sort of a quick start icebreaker question. Okay, so here's what I want to know: what stone cold A-list actor or actress, like a certified A-list, can you watch in absolutely any film and really enjoy it? So it doesn't have to necessarily be your favorite actor or actress, but who's someone you're just gonna know is always going to be agreeable in a movie that you see that is unquestionably A-list.
Female for me, my name's Brian McCullough. Hello, everyone. Female, Emily Blunt for me. Male, I'm just going to go Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
The great Leo.
Sorry, you took both sexes. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm an overachiever. I'm
No,
a 3
no.
on the Enneagram.
Yeah, no, it's good answers. I like both of them. Grizz?
Those are fantastic answers.
Yeah.
I'd have to go with Tom Hanks right off the top of my head. His recent stuffs have been kind of more of a stinkers, but they've still been outrageously enjoyable just because of Tom Hanks. So,
yeah, he had a pretty serious streak there.
Yeah.
Like 90s, 2000s, early
yeah,
aughts.
it was unbelievable.
Yeah, he was on a pretty
And then the
murderous
last
streak.
5 or 6 years, he's been on a roll of just random. They look unbelievable. Trailers look great, and then the movies are just meh.
Been a lot of hot
yeah.
trash from Hanks lately, but yeah, he's got some good high quality films.
Shout out to our future possible list of movies. Speaking of Tom Hanks, we do have The Burbs on our list of movies with low critic, high audience scores. So, just a little carrot on a stick there for potential future episodes.
I remember that was a staple of like the kind of like the Fox 59, like 59 being the Indianapolis local Fox station, like Saturday morning movie. Like The Burbs was on like every other weekend.
So good.
Yes, good film.
What's your answer, Nick?
My answer would probably be I would probably go with Brad Pitt. There really aren't any Brad Pitt movies I can really think of off the top of my head that I really don't like. There's clearly some weaker ones. Like I think of like California was a pretty rough film, and Killing Him Softly, as a more recent example, was not great. But
so your answer's not Clive Owen?
No, I don't. My stance on Clive. I'm not a Clive Owen fan. For our listeners at home, I just have never been a big. I do like a few Clive Owen movies, but for some reason he kind of rubs me the wrong way. We're not talking about Clive Owen tonight. We are talking about a young man, old man now. His name is Sly Stallone, and he made a film called Rocky IV that we're going to be talking about tonight. And before we jump into the movie here, as always, I want to say spoilers, always spoilers in our discussions here. So you have been warned. So, but we are talking about Rocky IV tonight. It came out in 1985. So maybe some of our older listeners will remember when it came out. It was a pretty big deal when it came out, and I've actually got an interesting stat that I'm going to drop here in a second, but. The movie, written and directed by the man, Judge Dredd himself, which, for the record, only the second best portrayal of Judge Dredd on the big screen, in my humble opinion.
Agreed.
After one, Carl Urban.
Carl Urban, number 1.
Very underrated movie. But I digress.
2012 Dredd.
Yeah, 2012 Dredd. Yes.
You guys turned me back onto that film to go back and rewatch it recently, and it was fantastic.
It's just good B-movie action.
Yeah.
It's nothing more than you want it to be, but it delivers.
Hey, did you just describe Rocky IV?
Maybe. There might be...
Oh, sorry. We'll get into that.
There might be some overlap there. So today's film, Rocky IV, it obviously stars one Sly Stallone. It also stars Talia Shire. It stars Burt Young, Carl Weathers, Brigitte Nielsen, and, of course, Dolph Lundgren. The laconic Dolph Lundgren in this episode, or in this film. As you might have guessed, if you aren't super familiar with Rocky, it is the 4th entry in the sort of, at this point, interminable Rocky franchise. But it's about Rocky. He's a boxer. He boxes people. Mostly he boxes people from Russia. Literally one or two more things happen over the course of this film. To be honest, not a lot happens. But we're gonna get into that, and that's just my opinion. But the movie ranks on Rotten Tomatoes at 37% with critics, and it's got a fairly formidable 79% with audiences. So we got a pretty big gap with this one. And here's something pretty interesting about this movie, guys, just to set us off here. So it was a big winner at the box office. Obviously, it made more than I believe $300 million on a budget of just $28 million, and it was actually technically the highest grossing sports film of all time until 2009.
Really?
Or I believe it was 2009 with The Blind Side.
I'm so glad you mentioned that stat because I was about to. It's mind blowing that what 25 years was it? Yeah, 20 plus years for something to take over that spot.
Yeah, right. That's a pretty rad statistic.
Do you have a breakdown for how much of that box office is domestic USA? Because probably 99.999%.
That's worldwide.
Wow.
And it was actually a big hit internationally.
See, that's
Big
very
hit.
strange.
I mean, I think, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but it had, there was a lot of tension in the world at that time, and I think a lot of people were maybe just interested in the movie because of that kind of overarching theme of the Cold War tension. But we will talk about that. So, guys, let's get into it. Why don't critics and audiences agree on this film? Let's talk about it. I think though, before we jump right into that, I do want to give this movie just a rating to set it sort of a baseline from both of you guys. And we have decided, we've come to the agreement that we are going to do a 100-point scale for the movies that we talk about here on Critical Mess. So I'm going to toss it to you guys. What did you rate this film?
75 out of 100 from Brian. I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Rotten Tomatoes, but I would have given it's a soft 4 out of 5. So that's an 80 out of 100, but I feel like 70 is too low, 3.5 out of 5. So I love the 100-point scale because I can get granular. 3 out of 4 stars, basically 75.
That's incredibly high. I'm shocked by that, but I put this at 34 out of 100 for Grizz over here. So
wow,
it did
You
not age
pretentious
well.
snob.
It didn't look good. There were a lot of reasons I didn't like this film, but I mean, the only reason it got those points were just strictly because of the nostalgia of just a couple of scenes. And
so you're only giving it the 30, not on the movie's merits, but like most of that's nostalgia fueled.
Most of it, yes.
Holy
There
shit.
was almost nothing in this that felt. I mean, the first Rocky was great, but there was just so many things wrong with this film.
Oh, what are these next 45 minutes going to be like? I can't wait. Nick,
Well, guys, I'm kind of middling here. I'm going to go kind of squarely between you two at a 53 is what I'm going to give this film. I enjoyed it to some extent. There were some things that were pretty painful to me when I watched it, but I certainly thought there was some value to be had watching this movie. So, I think one thing, kind of where I want to start here, and this may play into, at least some extent, the newer audience ratings. This movie, we've brought this up a couple times in a previous podcast about a movie feeling of the time, right? And I think this movie, as much as any film that I've maybe even ever seen, feels so of the time of 1985, just smack dab in the middle of the 80s. In every way, it feels like it embodies 1985. Thoughts, guys?
well, first of all, let me ask you, how do you qualify that? So I agree with you. Are you knocking the movie for that? Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? Or is that just an observation?
I don't see it as a good or bad thing,
Okay.
really. I think it is just an observation. I can see in some ways it's good and in some ways it's bad. Yeah, sort of ambivalent.
Yep. So I'm going to agree with you very much of the time. And matter of fact, I'll go ahead and read my first audience review here. This is from Anonymous. He gives it 4 stars. He or she gives it 4 stars, or they. And this was the review. The robot was weird. So, that's of the time, speaking of, yeah. And the robot was weird. But, everyone knows that. It's cringe looking back on it. There, I stole your thunder, Grizz, because I know you're going to knock that robot big time.
He was just about to go off. On
You're
this
just about
robot.
to go crazy.
Right out the gate, this movie started terribly with that robot, but that was actually not the first thing I noticed out of this film. But yes,
But robot notwithstanding.
Sure, sorry. So to answer your question, yes. So the biggest part of it to me, and what really stood out the most to me, and one of the things I really liked about this movie was the whole Cold War undertones. It's an emblematic movie. It's very of the time, which would be Cold War. I mean, this movie kind of predicted the downfall of the Soviet Union, which happened, which I think it was starting around that time, but it ended 6 years after this movie came
It
out.
was in 90. Was it
91,
when it
I
actually
think.
happened?
And so yeah, I mean, the movie was of the times in that it was a movie about the Cold War. It was about East versus West. I mean, literally the lyrics to the cheesy 80s songs that were playing during the montages had the terminology East versus West. I mean, it's very much of the time in that way. And then just as far as the 80s, I mean, I don't think it was any more of the time than any of the other Rockies past just the Cold War aspect and the robot. Those two things, to me, were the only things that really stuck out and plotted it smack dab in the middle of the 80s.
Chris, does this feel hardcore 80s to you?
Yeah, it definitely felt. I thought before I even watched this film, it's been years since I've seen it, but from what I remember, it was almost 100% nostalgia. It was just those major beats of just these iconic scenes or whatever. But I think going back and watching it, I legit thought this movie came out in the 90s for sure, like early 90s at the at least 91, 92 or something like that. I did not expect 85. But the way it was shot looked like it was shot in the early 70s. It just looked awful, like all across the board. I mean, there was a lot of things that I had issues with, but the start of the film was very dark. It was very poorly lit. Like it looked like it was using weird, harsh lighting from all different angles and all these different. And the robot scene was interesting with the birthday and what was it, Polly's birthday? Is that yeah? So like you're watching this, but the lighting just got me off guard, and I was like, oh, is this how the whole movie's going to be shot? And then it jumped to another kind of lighting, but it was just so strange. But it makes sense for that time frame. So that does feel early 80s, maybe mid 80s, but.
So, well, one thing I wanted to ask you guys that I forgot to ask already was, when did you guys first see this movie, and how many times have you seen this movie?
So I first saw it with my dad, and I first saw it I did not see it in the theater because I was 3 when it came out. I think I probably saw it I saw all the Rockies when I was 8 or 9, around then. And then I've seen Rocky 4. I've seen Rocky 1 5 times. Rocky 1's the best, in my opinion. I've seen Rocky 2 3 times. I've seen Rocky 3 only twice, and regrettably so. That one's horrendous. Not as bad as 5. And then I've seen Rocky 4 probably 15 times. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Not all the way straight through 15 times, maybe all the way straight through 6 or 7 times, but then a third here, a third there, probably equaling 15, I'd say. So.
Yeah, that's a lot of viewings.
And it's funny because before we decided to do this movie, my wife and I just naturally watched this movie just to enjoy it 3 weeks ago. So I've seen it twice in the last 3 weeks.
Oh, funny.
Yeah.
Funny.
Dang.
Chris?
Yeah. No, I had to have been maybe 10, so it had to be mid to late 90s, something like that, where I saw this and a bunch of movies I shouldn't have seen when I was younger, like RoboCop. It was in that frame of a lot of those 80s action PG-13 or R movies I started watching. So it'd been a number of years since I watched this full through. But I think almost everything I remember from it is just those major beats or those iconic scenes that you would, if you Googled an image of it or the title of the movie, it would just be those few scenes.
So how many times would you say you've actually seen the film?
Maybe 3 times, because I've watched it twice in prep for this podcast.
Yeah.
So.
And I would say, just for the record, to me, pretty much all this movie is major beats. I don't think there's any minor beats in this film.
An hour and 30 minutes of straight story beats, and it's perfect.
It yeah, it depends on what you like, but it definitely is. I have seen this movie probably only 2 times. I know I saw it when I was a kid, probably 10 or 12, and I don't remember it all that well. And then I saw it last night, so I'm sure it's been probably close to 30 years since I've seen this film. And I have thoughts on it, and I know you guys do too. So let's get into those a little bit here.
And I want to say I'm really glad that you guys both don't have I know, Grizz, you've talked about nostalgia, but it's not like you've seen it a whole bunch of times like I have. This was my go-to Rocky movie. This was like Star Wars for me. It's like we're watching Rocky 4. That's the only one that exists.
Oh, this was it. Rocky movie.
This was it.
Oh, okay.
But I'm really glad to hear, especially you, Nick, that you guys haven't seen this a bunch of times. I feel like you probably all things said and done, have a little bit more of a subjective take on this movie than I do. So I will come out and say, as much as I try to be unbiased and I try to look at this with a critical eye, and I've got a lot of reasoning behind why I rate it where I rate it, I do respect and like the fact that you guys are coming in a little colder than I am. So that's good. I think it makes for a well-rounded kind of opinion.
I wasn't expecting it. So, yeah.
I wasn't really either, but I didn't know you had so much history with this film, so that explains a lot. So the movie kind of opens right with some boxing, and I want to talk about the boxing in this movie. It is not the worst I've seen on film, but it's kind of rough. It's pretty rough. It's very, very dramatic and silly.
I can't think of any worse boxing that I've ever seen on film than this movie.
Raging Bull.
The only reason I'll say it's not necessarily worse is because I think the camera work was a lot more intentional, and it was kind of almost more hyper stylized. There's a specific scene that I'm talking about, but okay, I'll agree. They're both, from boxing standards, atrocious. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and for me, I guess it doesn't really hurt the film that much, but it still just is. I guess I just don't understand why they just didn't make the boxing more realistic. It's not like, I mean, it's the middle of the 80s. They could have shot a very accurate boxing, scene, and they just didn't.
Or even not even that, Nick. Just someone put your hands up and protect your face for one hit.
Right. There's just...
I don't know anything about boxing, but the one thing I do know is the boxing stance. And I didn't see anybody in that stance in this entire movie.
Yeah, the best part was the movie actually opens with, which is funny because it opens with the flashback to the previous movie, Rocky III, and he's fighting Mr. T. And so they show that montage, and that scene looked better than the next film, like the actual fighting in the end of this one. But They show that preface, they show that fight, and then it jumps, and it does the freeze frame of Rocky jumping, which is hilarious. And then this movie had a lot of freeze frames, but they freeze frame it, and then they jump straight into I think it was the montage of him and Apollo. Did it go straight into him and Apollo going at it in the sparring session? Is that what it was? Something like that?
Well, really, it was just basically like the last 8 minutes of Rocky 3 as the first 8 minutes in Rocky 4. And that's what they've done for all the Rockies. So that's kind of a precedent.
So that's what I didn't, because I've not watched all the Rockies. I wasn't like a huge Rocky guy because, I mean, they came out in the 70s, 80s, maybe into the early 90s, if I recall. I can't remember when 5 came out. But it's funny that they had to do that little preface and then they went into the next. But if you watch that opening scene with him fighting Mr. T, even T had his hands up. And he was in a proper stance of actually boxing, and then you could see them going back and forth that way. And then by the time you get to the end of this film, they're just all out, just punching each other in the face with their hands down at their side.
Now, I will speak to that, not to get too in the weeds with boxing, because I don't give a shit about boxing. Okay, but I will say that the announcers of that fight were aware of that. There was a line where they say, we're not even following any technical boxing standards because first of all, Ivan Drago was not a trained boxer. So that was part of his character arc, was he wasn't a trained boxer, he was just a machine. And then of course Rocky is boxing somebody who you'd never get two people in those different weight classes boxing each other in a real fight. Let's be honest, he's like reaching way up, so all like realism of a boxing match is out the window here. And the announcers even speak to that. So I think that last fight, I will say, at least to the logic of the movie, that last fight made sense from a this is what they're selling, all technicality has gone out the window, and I think it meant to do that.
Yeah, I do appreciate, and this definitely pushed my score up a little bit more, the amount of times they did remind you that this was an exhibition match. Like they did it over and over. Same with the Apollo one.
Well, I think the Apollo one was an exhibition match. I don't think the Rocky Ivan Drago one was.
It wasn't for a belt. I remember it was not sanctioned by the.
Oh, I could have swore they said this was the one with Rocky was another exhibition in Russia. Because they use that term quite a bit. I'll have to go back.
If they use that term, that's not how they proceeded to make the fight go. That was a fight for somebody to win. That was not an exhibition. Okay. Now the Apollo Creed one was an exhibition, and that's why it was so scandalous that it turned into what it turned into. But anyway, not to just to clarify. But Nick's right. It wasn't for a belt. It was a very unorthodox fight.
One of the big points here being that the way they chose to sort of portray the boxing could actually probably be a reason why this film is ranked like it is, for, or at least part of the reason, right? That for between critics and audiences. Critics see this and are like, well, this boxing looks like shit, and it's completely takes me out of it because there's just zero realism. And audiences maybe just don't care. I mean, it's really melodramatic fighting and whatever.
So can I just speak to that real quick? I read a lot of critic reviews on this, and I don't think I saw a single one where the critic rated it low because the boxing was unrealistic.
Interesting.
Almost every single one was saying it was a silly, stupid movie that's already been done before, and there weren't any developments or stakes or depth. I think they were speaking to it more from a movie critic place rather than a, well, that's not realistic boxing. 1 out of 5. So I hear what you're saying, and I wish I would have found some of those, because then at least I could have gone, oh, that makes sense. But a lot of these critic reviews, they were inconsistent, did not make sense. I just didn't see that sentiment said very often. So,
well, as a connoisseur of the sweet science, I would certainly have noted that in my review. But
as you should.
Perhaps I'm being a little too picky there.
That's one of the reasons I'm at a 75, not an 80 or an 85.
So one thing, that I thought, something else that happens kind of near the start of this film that sort of sets the tone, and we've touched on this a little bit already, but the Uncle Polly birthday party, right? And the robot that is just a strange development. It's interesting that, like, in 1985, I mean, even in 2023, we do not have robots capable of the things that, this 1985 robot that Rocky buys for his uncle is capable of. So it's that in of itself is impressive. But Polly, great character, probably my favorite character in the film, doesn't get developed too much because this movie just doesn't really. Not really into side characters and side stories and side plots. It's very point A to point B. But did you guys have thoughts on the that was that birthday party scene? It was tonally it was a little goofy. It was the robot thing. I mean, yeah.
I remember hating that as a 9-year-old. That's how bad it was, and of course I hated it now. Now it did lead to a great Polly quote when they were asking him what he wished for his birthday, and he wishes for this nightmare to end because the robot was freaking him out. Right, I think that's funny. I think they used the robot, at least as cringy as it was, they used it for a good storytelling gimmick.
And that's really the biggest arc of the film, right? It's
wait,
the Polly robot relationship.
Yeah, because then
by the end, they feel like they've got some tension, like some sexual tension, a little bit. It heats up.
Yeah, because he changed its parameters to be a sexy speaking,
right? That's right.
I'd say the biggest character arc of the movie, arguably, is Ivan Drago.
Interesting.
Yeah, you can see I think they purposely kept his lines to a minimum to make him feel like a machine. But his facial expressions were actually decent to show that. Like from the beginning, he was this stoic. There was always like super tight shots with his glistening face covered in baby oil. And then throughout the movie, he got more and more, like, you could see him getting, like, he pushes Apollo during the one-on-one, and then he doesn't show like a lot of emotion, so like he just feels like a machine. But towards the end, like, you can see the fear in his eyes and stuff like that, but he's not saying anything.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to actually, I mean, that might be the only thing that I saw that was like an actual turn of events for a character.
And I'm not positing that he has a very deep and complicated character arc. It's pretty shallow, but it probably
something changes.
I would say the biggest character arc overall would probably be Paulie, if you take all 4 movies into account, because remember Rocky IV, he's the disapproving brother, and by this time there's the great scenes of him with Duke the trainer in the ring. He's gone all the way to Russia to support Rocky. He's gone way outside of his comfort zone. Rocky 1, Paulie never would have done that. He's in Russia. He's at the ring. He's so into the fight. He's got his hand on Duke's bald head, rocking it back and forth, cheering. I mean, I love who Paulie has become. Now, it's not contained just within this movie, so I can't really give it that credit. But
yeah, we're only watching one movie.
Yeah, I know. You're right. You're right.
Which is hard for me because I do recall some of those scenes with Paulie, and like I remember liking him way more in some of those other movies, but I just don't remember enough to be like, oh, that story arc is really cool. But
when he falls in the snow, it's so
that was
funny.
The greatest. Him like making those weird like goofball groaning noises.
Where's my comics?
One other thing I just want to complain about that really lowered the score for me here was the child actor, Rocky's son. Really, really rough, irritating, hard to watch. And I don't like to judge the performance of a child. I mean, it's kid. He's doing his best out there. But really, the casting supervisor should have made a better choice. I mean, this child, first of all, looks absolutely nothing like Sylvester Stallone. I mean, he looks nothing like him, and he just kind of had this same silly, goofy expression on his face for the entire film that was just driving me insane. And I'm not saying that I was being that that I wasn't being ridiculous for feeling that way. But anyways, just didn't like that child actor very much. Didn't think he was portrayed well. Did you guys have similar feelings there, or am I off my rocker?
No, it was terrible.
Yeah, it was awful.
Horrendous.
I don't feel bad saying that. I think what was weird though, I think technically, like, I couldn't tell if his lines were dubbed later because they seemed way louder when he was speaking, they would cut really quick away from his face, or his head would turn, or like it was so strange. I think that maybe added to the awkwardness of the kid in general. But his lines were just awful. Like, who wrote this terrible character into this movie? And it's supposed to be his son, obviously Rocky, or Stallone. But it just felt so. It didn't seem like a kid was speaking that. It just seemed like they were just yelling, explicit like things just because it's a child.
I think you're onto something there. I think it did seem like maybe some of the kids' lines were dubbed, or there was something off about them. Yeah, you're right about that. So, Grizz, you were talking earlier about the lighting, which I thought was interesting, because one thing that sort of struck me was, so there are a lot of like press conference scenes in this film, and the kind of the lighting and the way these scenes are set up and filmed, to me, felt very. First of all, it felt very small. Didn't feel like like you would expect, like a big, international boxing match press conference to look. There weren't enough people there. The space itself just kind of looked too small, and I thought the lighting was also, like, as you kind of pointed out, it was just. I don't even know quite how to describe it, but it was very sort of like almost like a stage play or something, kind of like this really, like, just blasted with sort of spotlights and this kind of really glossy, all those scenes. There's just so much sports gloss in this movie, I feel like,
Yeah.
And
I can't tell. Like, what's funny is, like, once they went to Russia and they were outside, they couldn't do that. But there were those moments where, like, the birthday scene at the beginning of this movie, it just, the best way I can describe it is just like awkward, harsh lighting. It was just like from all angles. Like, it wasn't just like key light and a fill light and a backlight. It was like full blown 5 or 6 key lights on this person's face, but they were used with a super tight, lens. So it only hit one side of his face and the other one came from the below. And like, but the press conferences, that feels normal because you're in a stage setting usually. So, like, the lights may come from all kinds of different angles. You have cameras flashing, and video cameras back in the 80s all had huge, giant lights on them that they all had flashes. So that felt fine to me. But when it was like his house, that felt awkward. And then you do the scenes in the cabin and like them working out, like some of the montage scenes and stuff like that. The lighting was just, it was coming from the floor, and you're like, you're in a barn in Russia. I don't think there's going to be some crazy weird goof. It just took me by surprise. I think it just looked really strange.
Guys, can I stop us for a second? And I'm not to pause the podcast, but I need to stop this conversation for a second. Okay. I think we need to zoom out a little bit here. All right. So we're talking about fucking lighting and a kid actor who's barely in this movie and a cringy robot. Like, when are you guys going to actually tell me why the movie's bad? Like, can you actually spit? Like, when we talked about Bad Boys 2 in the first third of our podcast, we weren't talking about fucking lighting. We were talking about why nobody made any sense about what the fuck they were doing and how nothing made any sense. Okay. I need to start hearing some of that to hear a 30 rating. I'm sorry to challenge you, but like, if we're getting in the weeds on like light, like key lighting, like, good Lord, tell me why the movie is so terrible. Because I've got a bunch of reasons why it's great, and I'd love to jump into those. So I'm sorry, I got to be contentious for a second.
We're ready for it, and I think we're easing into it.
Okay,
I think we're starting small.
If we're easing into it, that's fine. I just want to make sure we get there because that's what we need to get to.
Well, let's just kind of jump right into it. I do want to make one comment, just because Grizz brought this up about Tony Montana. I just ruined the joke I was going to tell. Shit.
Tell
I was
it
going
anyway.
to say, I'm going to tell it anyway. I wrote in my notebook that Rocky's house looks like Tony Montana's summer home. It's just got that like 80s drug dealer flair to it that I find irresistible. So anyway, sorry for butchering that, everyone. Promise that was going to land otherwise. But anyways, all right. So let's talk about Brian. Let's talk about kind of what you brought up. Let's get to the macro. What are the big reasons why we didn't enjoy this movie? And I will start, Grizz, and please pile on. But to me, it's been a while since I feel like I've seen a film where so little happened. It was just, and not only that, there was just montage after montage after montage of the same shit over and over and over and over again, just ad nauseum. And not only that, during these montages where it was the same shit over and over again, there was a song playing with some dude singing about what was happening on screen, right? It's like, we're climbing the mountain, and then we're pumping some iron. And, it's like, and then it's East versus West. And so it's like, it's just, to me, it was just sort of just vapid, like at a certain point. Like I just couldn't, nothing was happening, I guess. So to me, basically what happened in this movie was there was the big initial event sort of is, Apollo Creed getting killed in the ring. And so that happens. And then really the only other thing that happens, I feel like, is Rocky trains and Drago trains, and then they fight, and then Rocky wins, and then that's like the whole movie. I mean, Adrian pops up. There's a couple lines here and there. There's a birthday party. Paulie's got a remark or two, but it's just, to me, there's no subtext. There's no side stories. There's no interesting side characters or and I'll throw one other thing out there while I'm on this rant. And I know this is a Rocky series thing, and I don't care. It still rubs me the wrong way. But good Lord, how much of the other fucking movies are we going to show in this movie? I mean, how much can you get away with without, like, shaving some money off the ticket price? Because you've already seen the other fucking movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 15 to 20% are just throwbacks to the old movies.
Yeah, right. We're literally showing footage from a movie we've probably already seen. Most of the audience has already seen. And I feel like if you were to do that today, that would be like the most lazy, ridiculous, thing that would just be utterly lampooned, even as part of like a big series. I know that it does happen a little bit, but it was egregious in this movie how much they showed the previous Rocky films. So that's a start. That's a starting point.
Yeah. I think just a couple. I mean, you can't forget about the awkward father-son conversation he has. I think generally from a critical standpoint, the writing and the dialogue of like all of the characters was just so bad. Like I couldn't get through a conversation. Like just watching two actors talk back and forth, just the way they were speaking didn't feel like it was fluid. It felt incredibly forced, like they had written it and not spoken it out until they got to the scene in the movie.
So like when Rocky says to Adrian, to beat me, he's going to have to kill me. And to kill me, he's going to have the heart to stand in front of me. And to do that, he's got to be willing to die himself. I don't know if he's ready to do that. Is that like an example, maybe?
Yeah. No, tell me that you didn't have subtitles on to understand.
Oh, I absolutely did.
Okay.
Yeah, I watch all movies with subtitles.
Oh, no, I'm just saying I had to turn subtitles. Like him in the conversation with his son, I couldn't tell you. Because I watched this movie twice. Once in a casual watch in the background, and then the second kind of more critical watch through. And there were multiple scenes where I had to stop, pause, rewind, turn on subtitles, and then very carefully read what the people were saying, because it made no sense. I even had to because some of them were talking so fast, it sounded like they were all drunk, to be honest with you. Especially Stallone, that's just how he sounds though.
Have you seen any other Rocky movies?
Yes. Yeah.
I know I'm not being sarcastic. I'm just asking, have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a while, but yes. Yeah. It's hard. I don't know. I watching this as a singular film, and we picked 4 because it has such that, separation in critic to audience score. But something about movies and just watching it to enjoy it, and there were so many things that take me out of a movie, and dialogue is one of them. If they can't speak clearly and smoothly, um, and it doesn't feel fluid like a natural conversation, that can take me out. If the way the scene's set up or the way it goes from one scene to the next, there were so many freeze frames that just I was like, most of the movie, like I would have to count how many seconds were spent with a quick freeze frame, and then it would slowly fade to black to the next scene.
And can I also point out this movie? What was it, like 93 minutes or something like that?
133, 100, hour and 33 minutes.
Yeah, tight.
Yeah, so it was a short movie,
which I loved.
I'm a big fan of the 90-minute film, so you don't have to talk me into that. But it's like, how could so few things have happened in such a short amount of time?
So real question, not sarcastic. Have you seen like all the other Rocky movies? Well, have you seen 1, 2, and 3?
No, I've seen 1, and I saw 2 a long, long time ago, and I don't think I've ever seen 3. And really quickly, sorry, can I clarify that last comment?
Sure.
When a short movie, what I meant by that is, if a movie's going to be that short, a lot has got to happen quickly, right? Usually a 90-minute movie has got to be pretty kinetic, generally speaking, just because that's kind of the nature of that kind of movie. But that's all I meant by that. Anyways,
okay.
Sorry.
So what kind of a rating would you give Rocky 1? We'll just say Rocky 1.
I think Rocky 1 is I'm going to call it slightly overrated. I think it's a good movie. I think it was clearly someone who, it was like, it was Stallone's first big, movie. I mean, he I really admire the fact that he demanded to star in the film that he, wrote and wanted to direct. And I think that's really cool. And I think that kind of plays into the mystique of the first film, that it was like, it was him or nobody. And I think it's a good movie. I think it's kind of a long, drawn out movie. I think it's, I don't think it's like a riveting movie, I guess, but I do see why it's a classic. I see why it's held in such high esteem. And I think it's, at the end of the day, a good film. 2, I don't remember that well. And 3, I just haven't seen.
3 is horrendous. I challenge you to watch 3 and then watch 4, and then maybe that'll shed a little light on how good 4 is. Just real quickly to speak on that. So Rocky, what happens in Rocky? I mean, Rocky's a half an hour longer than Rocky 4. Nothing beyond what happens in Rocky 4 happens in Rocky 1, but Rocky 4 is at least streamlined 30 minutes. Now, I will also caveat, I don't think Rocky 1's a boxing movie. I think it's a love story.
See, that's the big, to me, that's the big difference. Like the relationship in Rocky 1 is what carried the movie. I mean, think about the climax of the film. It all goes back to the relationship, right? And it's just not like that at all in Rocky 4.
No, and it's not trying to be at all. It's
no.
sort of like how, First Blood was a drama about a PTSD Vietnam vet, and the rest of them are action movies, right? And that's not bad. That's fine, But I think that the Rocky franchise turned into a boxing franchise because the titular character from the first one was a boxer. I think that's kind of what happened, good or bad. Now, Rocky 4, though, the reason that I think it's such a great singular-minded, streamlined movie is because it is the classic like hero's journey. It reminds me of Star Wars. I mean, it's like, you can't, I mean, I was going to ask you earlier, like, what happens in Star Wars? Nothing really happens. Then you started talking about interesting side characters, and of course that's where Star Wars shines, and for a lot of other reasons. But like, as far as things happening, I mean, this movie sets out to be the hero's journey. I mean, you have the exciting incident where he gets, he's not really sure, he doesn't really have the, Apollo Creed's the one who's got his whole like interesting dynamic of, hey, I'm getting old, who am I, what's my identity? I think this movie talks a lot about that in the beginning when Creed comes over and they're watching their previous fights, he and Rocky, and they're talking about like, Apollo Creed's getting all flustered. He's like, well, who am I, what am I? And I think that this movie brings that point to light in a pretty good way. I think that's something that everyone struggles with, and I like that they touched on that. But it starts there, Creed dies, and then there you go, Rocky's got this fuel now. And I think it leads to those great kind of quotes where he's talking to Adrian, and he's kind of, despite her not wanting him to go, he kind of goes, and does it. And then of course she comes and supports him, but it leads to really good moments of he and like Duke talking, and it's such an on the nose. I mean, this movie lacks nuance, but it has drive. It has purpose. It takes itself just the right amount of serious. It's very earnest movie. No one in this movie is laughing at themselves. They are in it to win it and in it to do it. And I think it's because of the stakes of 1985 Cold War. I think that made things feel more serious, I guess. And it was a different era. But, Duke and Rocky are talking, and you just have these great moments that set the stakes, right? We've talked about stakes in some of our previous episodes. Talked about stakes in Bad Boys 2 and how I joke that the stakes start and end exactly the same. They never change. And we talk about that. And I value stakes. I think that there needs to be stakes in a movie for it to be interesting. And when Duke's talking to him, they're in Russia, and it's like, they're by themselves in this cabin, and you're thinking, how's this going to end? Like, they're in Russia. This can't even be a victorious feeling, even if they win. And Duke says, you're the one who's going to keep his spirit alive. Talking about Apollo Creed. You're the one who's going to make sure he didn't die for nothing. I'm sorry, but that's just a straight ahead, like, high stakes moment to me.
I will say, can I just say quickly, there was never any doubt in my mind how this movie was going to end.
And there was never a doubt that the Titanic was going to sink. And I don't deduct how good Titanic was as a result of that. I mean, Rocky wins and all, and that I agree with you. I think there was never a doubt.
Were you really shocked that it was going to sink at the end?
Well, but here's the thing: the way it happened in a movie like Titanic, to me, was really interesting. There was a lot of nuance to the sinking of the ship and how it went down and how it happened. There's no nuance to the last fight and the way it went down. It was just very, as we've talked about, the boxing was terrible and it wasn't interesting.
I think everything that was interesting about that fight was all the things that weren't the fight. I think what was intriguing about that was that you have this commentary on, look, you have man versus machine, East versus West, but look, actually that machine is other humans. Like, these are actually humans over here. This isn't just a nameless force that we should just nuke to oblivion. These are people. And you have that kind of shown in, first of all, the way that Ivan Drago sort of like picks up his trainer's boss or whatever, and like throws him into the crowd, and he's like going to do it for himself. I love that. I love that we'll get into why he's a good antagonist. And that's one of the strongest parts about this movie is the antagonist. But I'll say that, he is what makes that interesting, and just the way that the crowd turns and the way that the crowd kind of joins Rocky's side. I think that's what's interesting about that last fight. And I think that's the nuance. I think that's the, Titanic sinks in an interesting way. I think Rocky wins in an interesting way. So, but there's something to be said about, yeah, right, would a crowd really turn on their own and start cheering for the other guy? Probably not. I think that's pretty unrealistic. Yeah, and I think that the only reason you can explain that is because Rocky's so clearly the underdog. And I think you can kind of look at that crowd there as sort of like the subjects or the peons of this like empire. And the fact that they sort of join with Rocky humanizes them, and they kind of can see it's not fair that this machine is beating down this man. And it's sort of the underdog, appeal. And I would say that's the only explanation for why an entirely foreign crowd would start cheering for the other country. Even though I'm not excusing it, I'm just offering a reason why it could potentially be, an explanation.
Yeah, that confused me all the hell. I don't know. The Russian crowd in Russia in 1985, like America versus Russia. Why in the world would that stadium start to cheer for the American in any way, shape, or form? But also on your point about Rocky being the underdog, I never felt he was the underdog in any way, shape, or form. I didn't think the stakes were that high. The Apollo death, unbelievable they killed Apollo in this film. But that was the only trajectory to get him to go and fight, because his friend died and he needs redemption out of this, or he needs that payback. But Rocky was the world champ. Apollo was 6 years plus away from boxing. Like, he didn't touch boxing for 5+ years. And so he wasn't primed and ready to fight. Rocky was still in his prime because he had all the like, you could see his lifestyle was still at that echelon of, he wasn't 5+ years out. He wasn't living in, a modest home to like live out his days as a retired boxer, like he is in the later like Rocky movies. So I think that's the hardest thing for me to see is, I don't think Rocky was the underdog. I didn't feel the stakes that Rocky would actually lose this fight, or they would, end it anyway. But he was the more trained boxer. He was more relevant, and like, he was the champ, the recent champ, if you will. And so he had the chops to fight somebody, and he even made those notes when they were talking. He was talking to Apollo. in both when they were reviewing tape and also right before I think Apollo went out to fight. They were talking about, he's like, oh, you need to train a little bit more. These are the notes I have on it. You need to see that you need to pace yourself. This guy's big. He'll tire himself out. There's like these things that he's telling him. And Apollo was completely blinded by the America versus Russia, like that big theatrical moment. And that's how many boxers in their late, I'm not a big boxing person or fighting person, but that's how I always see boxers or fighters in their late career. They're like, oh, I just want that big showdown so I can get a big payday and continue to make a big payday and then just kind of retire
I
off.
just want to restate for the record and clarify that in Rocky 4, you did not feel that Rocky was the underdog to Ivan Drago, who outweighed him by 80 pounds, was 6 inches plus taller than him, and punched 3 times as hard as a trained boxer punches. You did not feel that Rocky was the underdog. Okay.
I just want to remind everybody that you're listening to Critical Mess. This is episode 4, and we're talking about Rocky 4, coincidentally or not coincidentally. I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah. I like that.
So, guys, I think this has been a spirited debate so far. Brian, I want to make sure that we touch on, and Grizz too, if you've got anything in your back pocket. But I do want to get into a couple of the, sort of the reviews, and give a couple critical, a couple more audience reviews, just to get a little bit of a better feel of how those two.
Washington Post. Say what you like about the original Rocky, at least it was about something. A sweet pug up against the system and in love with a dowd. What's a dowd? I don't even know what a dowd is. Rocky IV appears to be an epic about Sylvester Stallone's penchant for self-abuse. Guys, this is the most about something film in the series. Okay, this is freaking about the Cold War. That's intentionally what this whole thing is an allegory for. I mean, for goodness sakes, Nick, you were joking about those corny lyrics, but Burning Heart. Does the crowd understand? Is it East versus West or man against man? Can any nation stand alone? Cheesy, yes. Profound? I think so. Though his body says stop, his spirit cries never. Deep in our soul, a quiet ember knows it's you against you. It's the paradox that drives us all. All right, so there we got another thing. You against you. Rocky struggling with the guilt of not throwing that white towel in during Creed's fight. Could have saved his life, didn't. Carries guilt for that, right? Now he's got motivation for the rest of the movie. So good, right? Simple, yes. Good, also yes. So yeah, Washington Post, yeah, it's about something, okay? You can pan it for other reasons, but don't say it's not about anything. Los Angeles Times, this is grim and witless storytelling, and what makes it so depressing is that it hasn't improved by so much as a chemical trace since the days of the first Rocky. So how does the storytelling not improving merit a bad review? Unless this person also said Rocky 1 was terrible because of the storytelling. Why does Los Angeles Times require the storytelling to increase in quality? If it was already good, does a sequel have to increase in storytelling from its predecessor? Is that what makes a sequel a sequel? I don't think so.
No, but it does have to hit the same bar.
But that's not what they're saying. You may say that, and I'll respect if you Grizz, if you say that, but that's not what they're saying. They're saying it just hasn't improved. It doesn't make sense to me. It's like you're grasping at straws, right? I'll read one more. Time Out says, film reduced to the barest of 3 acts. I feel like Nick could have written that. That's kind of what you're talking about. And I would argue that that's what makes this film good. Okay? This is not a nuanced film, kind of like Bad Boys 2, right? But I feel like this had all the gunk and muck stripped out, and it's a clean 3-act film with all the classic thematic elements, midpoint, stakes, that kind of stuff. So setups and payoffs big time here. So those are 3. I don't know if you guys have further thoughts about those. I've got a few more here I can run through. I don't want to monopolize though.
No, you said one that I already had, but it's so hard because the point about the number of times you've referenced Rocky 1, 2, and 3 as your points to argue that 4 is great, is a little hard for me because I have not seen 1, 2, and 3 in a number of years as well. I just came into this as a singular Rocky 4 film, and why this one specifically has such a crazy rating difference. But I think Rocky 1, like Nick was saying earlier, has that deep, like emotional story with him and his wife, and how he's coming up from the depths of where, uh, his upbringing, and he's trying to become this class boxer, and he's trying to win, and he's trying to do everything he can to achieve this dream of becoming like a world class boxer. And then, and it has like, how long was the first one? You said 2 hours, and that one had way more interesting character. It was a lot slower. It won Best Picture in '76 or
I think so. At least it
77,
was
something like that.
nominated.
So, I'm pretty sure it won Best Picture, right? Somebody will have to look that up or fact check it. But um, the fact that they found value in that story of just him and his wife and that upbringing, the true underdog story. Because I didn't think Rocky was an underdog in the story. I thought he was set up in a way that he was a smarter boxer, and they did make note that Drago was not a trained boxer.
Chris,
over and over and over
he
again.
trained in a remote cabin with no equipment against a machine that was doping on foreign territory, foreign ground. How much more underdog did you need his leg to be broken?
I just didn't see it. I don't know why. I didn't see it. Obviously, he was 2 feet taller than Stallone, and it looked awkward on scene. But
Could I say something about that? Because
Yeah.
I think to your something to what you're saying, Grizz, like and Brian, the idea that how could this guy be an underdog given those circumstances? And I think as a somewhat educated, rational viewer, we see kind of Drago running up a fake mountain, and Rocky is running up a real mountain, right? It's like kind of just as someone who's familiar with storytelling, that the whoever's doing the real thing, having the real authentic experience, is always going to have an advantage over someone who's having sort of the synthetic experience. So I think maybe that kind of plays into not seeing, even though he's, yes, I guess, portrayed as an underdog in a lot of ways, deep down we know he's not really the underdog because he's doing it the quote unquote right way. He's not getting shot up with steroids, and on these weird futuristic machines that's making making Drago the machine human that he is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The idea that as a physical workout, like you're watching Drago on the actual Stairmaster, and you see him doing the exact same motion over and over again, and you think Rocky training and climbing a mountain, his legs are going to hit at a completely different level in just basic training formats. Like his leg and the muscles in his legs are going to transform and like build up a lot stronger in a different way.
I think just real quick to talk about Rocky, because we are talking about a franchise here. We can I think there is something to be said about the predecessors in the franchise. I think Rocky IV has to stand alone. That's why I didn't include the poly character arc in this. But I do think you have to look at it in context of the franchise, and the way you do that is you say, what kind of movie is this? What's this movie trying to be? And I think that's fair. Rocky 1, again, different kind of movie. I don't think it was a very well-made movie. I think what made Rocky 1 so good was the character performance between Rocky and Adrian. Just there's never been anything like it. It's so perfect. It's so innocent. It's so simple, profound. It's just cathartic. And then just the story, very, very simple movie making. But yeah, I think that, I don't know if you're talking about, okay, why don't we all go out and climb mountains? Why are there gyms? I don't know, guys. I'm not really buying I think what you're touching on, and what I would say is that the reason that Rocky was not the underdog was his motivation, was his heart, was the reason behind doing this. He was not a puppet like Drago was. He was not this specimen that was, quote unquote, grown in a lab by this totalitarian communist regime who is creating this monster to destroy the world. He has this heart because he's got this hero's journey he's on, and he climbs to the top of the mountain, figuratively and literally, and that's why we know deep down he's not the underdog. He's the underdog on paper, but it's like we know deep down he's not, and I think that's what makes it interesting to see how that plays out. So I'll read a couple more of these critic review summaries here, and I'll give my little commentary about them. Empire. The jingoism is blindingly awful, but by the time of the showdown, the film has descended into an unaware parody of itself. Guys, I think the tone, and sensibilities of this movie are on point. I think they're as earnest as ever. I'm buying all in with these how serious this movie is taking itself. I don't think there's any hint of parody. I don't understand why Empire needs to say it's an unaware parody. I guess unaware parody. Okay, that's a little different, but yeah. I'm not buying that one.
Yeah,
I just
I
want to
don't know.
point out that jingoism's a great word, but sorry.
I can touch on that a little bit, but there were moments where the levity was like they tried to jokingly make a scene out of something, or like there was a quick glance or a look of some like it. It was mostly in the first act, though. I don't think the last act was definitely more serious. It was darker. They're in Russia. You can tell it was more serious. But then the second act, when they're doing the training montage, they're on their way to Russia. There was just some awkward, weird dialogue with him and his kids, and he's, at the house and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Just didn't feel
Sure, yeah. And we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And also, here's another one. Variety says, beyond its visceral appeal, Rocky IV is truly the worst of the lot. Though Stallone himself is more personable in this one, and that helps. Have they? So I'm not even gonna. Let's just pretend Rocky V doesn't exist. I haven't looked into who made that movie, who wrote and directed that. I'm just good. It's a bad movie. Okay, I think we can all agree. But have they seen Rocky III? I mean, Rocky III. It's a bunch of characters yelling at the top of their lungs at each other. There's no subtle, like, that classic Rocky charm where he's talking to Adrian, he's kind of go, hey, hey, how you, I love you.
That's actually not bad.
I've literally never tried that in my life. That's the 1792 talking. But,
Our proud sponsor, 1792.
Yep. Yep. Email us. But three is horrendous from just a bad. I mean, 3 is the worst of the 4 Rockies. Okay, it's just weird that Variety would say that. It's like they said that, but they'd never seen the first 3. I don't know. Time magazine, padded with clips from earlier Rocky pictures, which we've talked about, adding nothing to his mythic, let alone human dimensions. It lacks even the primitive suspense and crude capacity to release underdog emotions that permitted its predecessors to conquer one's better judgment. My response to that, I think this is probably peak underdog Rocky vibe. And, I've already realized that I guess not everyone agrees with that. It kind of blows my mind. But I think the reason I'll say that is because previously this was man versus man. Just a refresher on Rocky III, he's getting ready to retire. He's maybe a little bit past his prime. He's done. And this young upstart Clubber Lang comes in, Mr. T. He comes in talking all kinds of trash, saying stuff about Rocky's wife. And he gets them all riled up, and then they've got this fight, and it's like an ego kind of settling fight or whatever. And even that, it may be Rocky against a younger, stronger man, but it's still man versus man. You guys, Rocky IV is man versus machine. It's the John Henry, Rocky. It's such an interesting, intriguing idea, and I love that. And so I disagree with Time Magazine. I don't think that it's not an underdog movie. I don't know. And the last one I'll read. The one I agree with, Orlando Sentinel. I think I've agreed with them before. Or maybe it was the Austin something. There's one of those cities down there. There's a guy down there that or a girl, or whatever. The new film's narrative is stripped down to essentials, which gives it an emblematic quality. I used that word before, emblematic. Yes, this movie is, in a word, emblematic. It champions an idea, and that is East versus West, So those are the critic reviews. I only have a couple of audience ones. I'm not going to rail into them this time because I tended to agree with them. So it's funnier when I disagree with them, so I can make fun of them and their grammar. Couldn't really do that so much this time, but anyway. Thoughts, guys? Thoughts on those critic reviews? Did you agree with them? Did you disagree with them? Did you find your own other critic reviews? I just read a little sampling.
I mean, they're mostly tracking with me. I think I vibe with a lot of what the critics were saying there, more or less. I'm still a little disappointed no one thought the boxing was trash. That was a reason to knock a few points off, but that's all right. That's just
weird.
Me.
It's almost like the critics are watching these movies to see how good of a movie they are, and not how accurate the boxing is.
Listen to it.
I'm sorry. That was kind of a snide. Grizz, you're just kind of staring up
Pondering.
and to the left.
Yeah, I don't know. It's such a strange film. I think you've just referenced back to 1, 2, and 3 so much with the character arcs from 1, 2, and 3 to 4, and then you've kind of thrown in 5 as well.
Just for comparison, but
it's hard to debate those when I don't know the storyline fully.
You don't need to speak to that. I didn't know if you had any additional thoughts there.
No, I think I do align with most of the critic scores. I 2 of the ones you read are the same ones I had written down. But the thing about this film is, I don't know. I just expected a lot more. I don't remember it being so hokey and goofball, and especially in the first act and into the second act with just the line reads and like just the way the characters are built up. Paulie was just absolutely atrocious. I couldn't understand
Really?
anything that he was doing. Like
Oh, he
he
was
was
great.
ringside, sure, but like outside of him falling in the snow and being a goofball, like looking for his comics and stuff, like or what was he when he walked off the plane and asked for if his comics were here or something like that?
You didn't like Polly in this movie.
No, I just didn't understand. Like same with the kid. The kid was terrible. Like
Wait,
Adrian wasn't in this at all. It seemed like she just had that one quick little turn to get him to push him out the door and like tell him, yes, you can. Like you can prove yourself and go do this.
yeah, I mean, this movie wasn't about Rocky and Adrian. They've already done that. This movie
Yeah,
wasn't about
yeah.
Polly. They've already done that. This movie was about man versus machine. I mean, that's why that was what the movie had in it, you know?
Yeah, it's strange because Man vs. Machine was only what the last 12 minutes or 15 minutes.
I think it started at the very beginning when Drago comes to America and they're in the press conference, and I'd like to spend a little time talking about how great of an antagonist is in this movie, but you know, we can get there.
Yeah, who's the antagonist in this movie?
Well, who do you think?
I think it's just Russia in general. I don't think it's Drago as much as you might think.
I think that yes, yeah. Although I don't think that is what Rocky has to. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't think that's what he has to overcome.
He didn't have to physically fight Russia. He had to physically fight another man, which makes sense. You're saying the man versus man thing.
I think Rocky had to overcome his guilt for letting Creed die, and then he had to overcome Drago, who was the one who killed his friend.
Yeah, I mean the Apollo stuff was the most unbelievable part of the entire movie. Like his scenes and like him not dropping the towel. Like I think they even showed a close up of him with the towel in his hand, right? Right before he was getting ready, and he told him like specifically, "Don't stop this fight" or whatever it was. But it's I don't know. It's so strange because like he looks at it and I think it's just Russia in general because I don't know, you look at the man versus man thing and it's hard, but I feel like that's only the last 15 minutes when he's physically fighting that person. But then he does that whole, and apparently this was improv, that last scene or that last line where Rocky's saying like, "This is for us. This is for everybody. If you want," or what, I can't remember what the line was. You might be able to.
It's
look
a
it up.
bad speech at the end.
Yeah,
it's a bad speech.
but he improv that apparently
Okay.
on the spot.
Not surprised.
And, yeah.
Can I ask you this? In Star Wars, who or what is the antagonist then? Is it the Empire or is it Darth Vader?
Probably, I would say the Empire.
It's
more
Darth
so.
Vader. It's Darth Vader.
It's hard to say it's Darth Vader,
And it's Darth Vader.
because of the number of references they make to the Empire rather than Darth Vader himself.
I'll say it's Darth Vader because I think that Darth Vader specifically is the cause of the hero overcoming obstacles. I think
he's the visual. I think he's the visualization of the Empire, but I don't think he's.
I don't think Luke's battling the Emperor. I don't think he's battling the Empire. I think his fight is with Darth Vader specifically. And I think similarly in Rocky, his battle is Ivan Drago.
That's a great comparison, though.
Thanks, I just kind of pulled it out
Go
of my
back
ass.
and yeah, that's pretty good.
And I guess the reason I'm bringing that up is because if we can talk about the antagonist for a second, I think that Drago is really, really, really good because he's formidable, he's threatening, he literally kills with padded boxing gloves a world champion boxer. I mean,
what was his line?
he had a couple.
If he dies, he dies.
If he dies,
or
he
whatever.
dies. Yeah, that was corny. That was a little corny.
That was
But
pretty
I
good.
love how simple Drago is. In simple. So have you guys seen Game of Thrones? The White Walker is one of my favorite all-time villains, and he literally has 0 lines in the entire series, and that makes him so monolithic, or that's not the right word, but like just, oh my gosh, like so scary. And I think that Drago having so few lines it makes him very threatening. And I love how he says, you know, you will lose.
That was also a suggestion by Dolph Lundgren.
Was it?
To have little lines.
Okay. Well, good.
So
It worked.
That was awesome.
I think the impact, though, of that is, and not to be too much devil's advocate here, but is mitigated a little bit by Brigitte Nielsen sort of being his mouthpiece, kind of says what he's thinking and what he's feeling and his plan. And so it's kind of like, it's not quite as ambiguous as it was maybe with someone like the White Walkers, who didn't have like a spokesperson to tell us what was going on with them at the time. nonetheless, point taken. And I agree that Drago was a good antagonist. I think my biggest problem overall with him was just at the end how, his entire ideology, the country he loves, the people that have been training him and spending millions of dollars on him being this uber athlete, just all of it goes to shit in this moment of passion for this American underdog. It just seems a bit rainbows and gumdrops, kind of ludicrous to me.
You don't think that had been building the whole movie?
Not, I mean, I maybe to some extent, but not in a palpable enough way, I guess.
Oh, guys, to me, Drago had never bought into the Russian ideology. He was like a wild captured animal that was like seeing the bright lights and just doing what he was told, and had a lot of inner conflict. And I think a lot of that was subtle performance by the way that he was a formidable foe in the ring because he liked boxing. I don't think that he really ever said, I love Russia. I'm in it to win it. There was nothing that told me that he was in it for the ideology. He was in it because he's just this specimen that was taken advantage of, and he finally breaks and does it for him. And I love that antagonist character arc. That's one of the things I really like about him as an antagonist.
You might be onto something there.
Okay.
I think you might be honest, especially with when you look at the pre-fight performances, the James Brown shindig compared with the Russian thing. Like,
I love that.
Apollo was just, he was grooving.
I hated that.
He was getting down.
When I was a kid, I hated that whole sequence, and now as an adult, I've grown to love that.
It's pretty fun.
So great.
It's pretty fun. But you're right though, and Drago in his sort of big, preamble to the fight that was all about Russia, he wasn't like all pumped up and excited in the way that Apollo was for America. And I think that's a pretty valid point. So here's something I want to do here, guys. We've been talking about this movie for a while now, and I just want to remind everyone, you are listening to Critical Mess here. This is episode 4, and we were talking about Rocky 4. I want to kind of just do a quick sort of rapid fire here, and I have just some observations just about the movie, and I just want to fire them off, and I would just love if you guys have just quick reactions to any of the things I'm going to say here. If you don't have a reaction, then we'll just have a little bit of awkward silence. But,
I'll keep it to one sentence.
Yeah. I'd just be interesting to hear what you have to say about any of this stuff. So let's just start with one observation I have to make about this movie. It's just so obvious, but I've just got to say it. Everyone is so sweaty all the time. It's just everyone is just glistening with baby oil and sweat, and it's just splashing everywhere and hitting everyone in the face. Guys, was the sweat? How did the sweat rub you? Or not? That's a weird way to say it.
So yeah, the how did the sweat rub me? I got to be honest. I liked it, and when they started that last fight, and Drago and Rocky both take their robes or shirts or whatever off, and you see them just kind of like glistening. I mean, I'm a happily married man, but I liked what I saw.
Chris, how do we feel about the sweat rapid fire?
It was a lot. And what's funny about it is whenever they did a close up, you could tell that they overexposed so harshly that the white spots were so hot that you could tell that they just couldn't hit it with it was terrible. I don't know. It was so much sweat.
Yeah, this movie, should have been called Buckets of Sweat.
Give me another one.
Okay, we already touched on this, but I think it just bears mentioning again because it was a significant point in the film. James Brown's performance, piping hot, guys. I really was on the edge of my seat for the whole thing. Living in America, the dance moves, just the Godfather of Soul. That alone probably bumped this film up at least 5 to 10 points for me.
Are you being unironic?
I'm being unironic. Yes.
Okay, good. So I guess I'll add on. I loved what Apollo Creed was doing during that scene. I loved how cocky he was. He's such a likable guy. I love Carl Weathers and the way he was dancing around and giving the fist bump to James Brown. Yeah,
and that outfit, the top hat.
Just again, I appreciate that as an adult a lot more than I did when I was a kid.
I think it's interesting you talk about that, but like that whole scene was just so over the top, and you could tell he was there for just a exhibition match, like a typical thing. And that's where like the sadness comes in. You're like, oh my God, like he got murdered in the fight. and he was expecting it to be just this basic, exhibition match, and he didn't expect it to be, because he's what, 6 years past or 5 years past his prime, or past his career ending, and so he's out there just making a few extra bucks, making it a theatrical, fun kind of thing. But that was.
I'll tell you what, man. I haven't seen a movie escalate the stakes from 0 to 60 like that fight does in Rocky 4 for in a long time, and I herald that.
I just wish those stakes continued to grow, and like there was something else that helped Rocky other than just that. That was a very massive climax, like, or to hit that point and him die in that scene, and like you have that scene of Rocky holding him on the mat, and then it doesn't feel like it continues to grow or escalate. It's just, there's nothing. It just continues. It flatlines the rest of the film. I don't think there was anything else that helped Rocky to be like, holy fuck, like that. I just watched that happen right there. And then you have the montage scene, him at this house, him with his son, his wife. And then it goes into montage. He's going to Russia. He's like immediately on the plane to go to Russia.
Apollo dies looking kind of like a 2-bit male stripper Uncle Sam, doesn't he? Kind of a rough way to go.
That's an astute observation.
All right, guys, we're doing rapid fire here.
Yeah, rapid fire. Grizz, one sentence.
Sorry,
quick
guys.
reactions. Stallone, he's rocking the Boss real hard. What happened to the brand Boss? Let's go.
I've never owned anything Hugo Boss, but I did love when him, Polly, and Duke come out in the Boss hoodies. That was pretty boss.
Still on sale
Super
at Kohl's.
Is it? Can you still get Boss
I guarantee it. I've not been in Kohl's in 20 years, but I bet it's still there.
Yeah, right next to the Bugle Boy jeans.
Yeah, and the Citizen watches, yeah.
Right, and the No Fear t-shirts. Yeah, right. Okay, can we talk really quickly about the epic handlebar mustache on the Bruce Buffer guy announcing the exhibition fight with Apollo Creed? Holy shit, that was the most rad mustache I've ever seen. Did you guys have thoughts on that? Did it catch you?
I tried to grow my mustache out last week, and it didn't work. And when I saw him, guy was a little jealous.
Also very baby oil filled. But funny enough, I literally just saw someone at the store the other night with the exact same facial hair.
Yeah, I feel like the world needs more handlebar mustaches.
It threw me off for sure.
It's a vibe.
Great story, Grizz.
Okay, so there was a very, you guys probably didn't notice this subtle little
the
thing.
story in Rocky 4.
Ouch.
Ooh,
Shots
burn.
fired.
Burn. So there's a point in the scene at a press conference where Paulie looks at Rocky right at the press conference when it is revealed that Rocky will not be doing this fight for the money. And Paulie gives him a look like, you fucking moron.
Oh, really?
What's wrong with you? And it is just an epic look. And I just don't know. It's kind of like, to tie it back to our last podcast on The Greatest Showman, there was like this crazy half-second look by, I forget the actress's name.
Oh, Jenny Lind.
Yes.
You were talking about
Yeah,
that.
she does this kind
It's
of
a very-
crazy, weird look at Hugh Jackman at the end of her big song.
Was
her
it
big
like
number.
that?
It was kind of like a moment like that, where it's
Okay.
just like a half a second of just a really sincere glance. It was like pure panic. Like Paulie
Sure.
was like, "At your money? No money." He was very. It was beyond disappointed. So I don't know if anybody caught.
I
it.
did
You
not
really
catch
watch
that.
these movies with a fine-tooth comb. Like, you do not look away from the screen, and I respect that.
Yeah, I had to turn myself when I watch these now. I have a casual watch to start. I will watch it in the background, or I'll watch it just while I'm doing something, or just quickly I'll watch it quick through. I won't, and then I'll watch it with a critical eye a second time, pause it, stop it, rewind it, make notes, all that stuff. I think that's kind of helping me overall with the.
I feel like you might want to flip-flop that technique.
Yeah, maybe I might need to.
Anyway, what's next, Nick?
All right. Next up, Rocky's Lambo with a little heart drawn next to it. Do you guys? There was the Jalpa. Do you guys remember the Lamborghini Jalpa? The kind of the black. It's kind of a forgotten sports car classic that you don't really, aside from this movie, like you don't see those Lambos.
I think I could maybe name 2 Lamborghini models. I'm not a car guy. The Diablo and the
Countach?
Countach.
Those are the only 1.5 I can do.
When that scene
apparently.
came up, I was too distracted by the robot and him taking a phone call and walking around it in a circle.
Well, that's a great segue because my next note is Paulie banging this robot? Thoughts?
Clearly. I mean, the robot can do it all. So
It
yeah,
certainly seemed like it.
put it this way. Paulie starts the movie in a bad mood, and the rest of the movie he's in a great mood. Just saying.
Based on his facial expressions after Rocky asked, "Did you change its vocals or whatever it was, or change its personality?" He was like, and he just, yeah, of course I did. But
We'll just leave it at he's satisfied. We already talked about the child, how awful the child was, but just another quick note on it. Just huge head like a mushroom. I had to call it. It had that very late or kind of mid late 80s. What was that called? It was like the bowl
Chili
cut.
bowl. Chili bowl.
Yeah, but it was like kind of like a super poofed up. He looked kind of like Toad,
Yeah.
like Mario Brothers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the 80s.
Yeah, and it was nothing against it. Was just it stood out to me.
No comment.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, this is a really quick one. Just a short answer here. More important movie for the USA winning the Cold War: Top Gun or Rocky IV?
Top Gun.
I can't answer that because I don't remember or care about Top Gun, so I abstain. I respect your answer, Chris.
Yeah. Well, a fun fact about Top Gun, they said that military recruit went up 700% after that movie came out.
I heard that, and it made me like the movie even less because I fucking hate the
It's
military
insane.
and the army.
But the fact
So,
that
goodbye.
single movie
Yeah.
just absolutely catapulted people.
I think
into the
you're
military.
speaking to why probably the answer is Top Gun.
Yeah.
All right, a statement here. I will concede this completely. The workout kind of montage at the end of this film is probably the most iconic montage of all time. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a more important one in the history of film. Honestly, the driving sense and just the sheer length. It just goes on and on and on and on, for better or worse. Do you guys agree? Is this the montage to end all montages?
Yes, Nick. This movie has no less than 5 montages in it. The one you're talking about is the second half of a 2-part banger.
And I'm glad you pointed that out. It is a 2-part. It takes a little breather, and then it comes back with even more vengeance.
The first half of this montage we're speaking of here is, it's just an instrumental 80s track. Bill Conti, does the score. And then you see Adrian comes in on the plane. There's some they have a talk. He gets remotivated because now Adrian's on board and all the pieces fit together right there. That's our midpoint, guys. And now all of a sudden we have everything we need to move this movie into the third act. And then boom, they drop that second half of the montage part 5 on you. And oh, it's so good. The training. Oh my gosh, you guys, come on. It doesn't get any better.
I mean, Rocky's got to be the echelon of movies using montage, right? I mean, there's those absolute
The sheer time
Oh,
spent
it's just
in montage.
yeah, absolutely.
It's probably unprecedented.
No, and it's a sports movie, and most sports movies have montages because you have to see improvement in a craft over time, and you've got an hour and a half of runtime, so you can't show how that happens. You can either exposit it, which is cheap, or you can spend the time on a good montage and have somebody write a song and then cut the montage together. And there's bad ways to do montages, but this one again, there's 5 here. This is the 5th one, and yeah.
All right, just a couple more quick rapid fires here, guys, before final thoughts. I thought it was interesting that it showed Drago just so explicitly on the juice, right? Getting shot up full of steroids. When Stallone, it doesn't show him taking any juice, but I've never seen someone more obviously on juice than Sylvester Stallone in this film. And I thought it was a bit, I don't know quite what the right adjective is, but maybe a bit arrogant of the film to show Dolph Lundgren getting shot up with steroids. Look at this man. Look at Rocky. I mean, he just looks like what you look like when you pump yourself full of tons of steroids. So how do we justify that?
Well, I justify it by the montage payoff. I mean, he is clearly working his ass off, 2-3 a day workouts, and I think that's what the movie's telling us is the reason that he's as jacked as he is. It's not like he just walks out there and he's that jacked. Agree, he's juicing in real life. I think that's a meta commentary. I don't think that's takes away from, I think the movie takes its time to set up that payoff.
But we can be in agreement at least that no one, except for like the 0.00001% of people who have insane freak genetics, could ever look like that man looks, regardless of how many fucking trees you're chopping down in the Russian Arctic.
No, and I would say I don't think anybody, I don't think genetics will even get you there. So
Yeah, I mean, you've got your, one in a million LeBron James kind of people, right? That just are just have insane free. I mean, it's just super, super rare, I guess. And Sylvester Stallone is not one of
I
those
mean, come
people.
on, guys.
No.
To
It's
be clear,
1985. Let's.
Yeah, they're all juice.
yeah, there was some heavy. One thing that I maybe kind of wanted to rapid fire end on here was I thought it was kind of interesting, maybe tonally a little bit here at the very end of the film when Stallone says "Merry Christmas, kid" to his child. By the way, does the child have a name? Is he Rocky Jr. or something? Anyone catch the name?
Rocky Son 1.
No one. Yeah, and I'm not sure they ever even said his name.
Maybe his name's Stone.
But I guess the big question then is this a Christmas movie, guys?
No.
Go.
No.
Absolutely
Absolutely not.
It was shot in the Russia scenes were shot in Wyoming. That's the only.
Just because a movie takes place during Christmas doesn't mean it's a Christmas movie. I would say, I think we talked about this before. I think Christmas has to be able to drive the plot forward. Specifically, like in Die Hard, is this the classic? Oh, is it a Christmas or not movie? I think it is because it has to do with the actual plot.
Sure.
But I don't
and
think
I'm
Rocky
being
is.
slightly facetious
Sure,
for the record,
yeah.
but
I know,
the
but that's
fact
a
that they
contentious-
Way
just-
to Brian to just bring it home with a real serious take.
No, but
No,
the fact they threw that in seemed like it was like, well, all of a sudden it's Christmas and we're going to talk about Christmas in the last 10 seconds. That's like, what the fuck's going on here? Like, this seems like a strange shift.
It was out of left field for
Yeah.
sure, and this was not a Christmas movie.
I didn't see any snow. I didn't see any ribbons or presents.
No, there's a lot of snow, but it wasn't snowing.
Well, no, I'm sorry. There's actually, you're right. There's a shitload of snow, but there's always snow in Russia. It could be, August. Anyways. All right, guys. I think we're probably ready for final thoughts here. What do we have to say about Rocky IV? How do we put a button on it? Grizz, you're up.
As an overall singular film, if I'm looking at just Rocky IV, it's I don't know. I don't have enough nostalgia, and I was just thinking this. And Brian's 40 now. I'm 35.
Why'd you say it like that? You said the 40 with the F was real pronounced.
Yeah,
40.
He's very old. I can tell his knees hurt. But I think that sweet spot of you finding so much nostalgia for it. But I think you found some great points. I do find your take on this film in general was very strong, which makes me want to take my debate skills a little bit higher for this next episode. So I don't know. I just think it's just one of those. I don't think I felt the nostalgia for it. I just remember those couple those beat scenes. But overall, I just could not stand a lot of things about this movie. I mean, it was fun, sure, but there were a lot of things that were just awkward or took me right out of the film. And I think I'll say this over and over again. If it's something that takes me out of the film, it kills it for me. So.
I highly respect that. I think we talked about that in The Greatest Showman when I talked about, we were talking about the bad CGI in The Greatest Showman, episode 3. And I said, for me, the bad CGI did not take me out of it, but I definitely can see if it would take you out of it. And I respect that. And, you kind of can't help if something takes you out of a movie, right? We're all wired the way we are. We're not trying to be taken out of a movie. We want to be in the movie. But if something takes us out of it, what I mean by that is we kind of lose immersion. You kind of can't help that. I can see like everything you've said tonight about all the things that took you out of it. I can totally see like a lot of those things just didn't happen to take me out of it. So that's just a very subjective.
Yeah,
thing.
and it's
so
not
I
often that I would rate a movie this low. I'm sure I could go back and watch Rocky 1 or 3 or something like that and find it a little higher rating. But I think it's just that fact that it did it so often. And the dialogue was it just one thing after another just kind of stacked it up for me. It just kind of felt odd.
So I guess I'll just try to sum up my final thoughts with kind of one main point, and that is to compare this to like Bad Boys 2 or something. I think with Rocky 4, somebody sat down with a singular vision. They knew exactly what movie they wanted to make, and they made that movie. I think with a movie like Bad Boys 2 or The Greatest Showman, you have a committee of people that come together and go, well, let's make a bunch of money. How are we going to do it? We'll finagle these points together and pieces together and make this quilt. And it, okay, cool. I credit Rocky IV for being singular in vision. I credit it for taking itself just as serious as it needs to. I credit it for being about something. It's not like they just said, well, what have we done? We've done 1, 2, and 3. With 4, they go, oh well, shit, we got a Cold War. Let's incorporate that. I mean, to me, like that's something. And they
ahead of time too.
Yeah, that's true. And they went all in on it. And I respect that too. They could have played it safe and gone, well, let's just make the Cold War be a little part of the story. No, they went all in, and I respect them for doing that. And then finally, I'll say, the montages, guys, were so, and I mean, montages are cathartic and cool and great, and you always get excited when a montage starts, but man, this one, they just kept coming at you, and I loved that. It hyped me up, and this movie had moments. This movie had some really moments that had gravitas to them. When after round one, when Apollo gets his ass kicked and he's like, I'm going to go back out there, man, all of a sudden your heart sinks during that fight. They do a really great job at just making you realize how high those stakes have escalated to. The moment in the last fight, conversely, where Rocky, you go, Drago, lets his midsection just like open so Rocky can just hit him, and it like doesn't do anything to him. And I'm like, oh, like, how is he going to beat this guy? Like, what in the world? He's just letting him get these free hits. And then when he cuts him in, what is it, round 2 or 3, like the music comes in, and that's a moment. And you're like, wait, Rocky can do this, There's a lot of really great moments in this movie. And then I just don't think the movie commits any big enough sins to where I'm going to take points away from it. So I think it sets out to do something, and it does it. And I don't care what movie we're talking about. If the movie does that, that's something.
Yeah. Well, to sum it all up here, guys, I'm going to echo a lot of the things you said, Brian, and you too, Grizz. I mean, because I did kind of fall in the middle between both of you here. I think this was, at the end of the day, we've hit on this, but it's a very simple film. It's a simple film, for better or worse. Leonardo da Vinci would say that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So perhaps there's something to be said for simplicity. To me, this movie was a little bit too simple, erring on that side. However, I did get a fair bit of enjoyment out of it, and frankly, part of the enjoyment I really got out of it was just the fact that, as we talked about at the very top of this conversation, this movie to me is ultimate 80s. It's ultimate 80s. I was born in the 80s. I have kind of this really nostalgic feel for the 80s, and very few, if any, movie feels just as pure 80s as this one does. And I think that, a big reason why this movie still remains so, kind of weighty and powerful today is, Brian, as you kind of touched on, thematically, it's about as gigantic as you can get. Like the two big world superpowers going toe to toe. I mean, especially at the time, I mean, that you can't really put higher stakes than nuclear war, right? I mean, that's about at the top. So in terms of that, the movie succeeds. And one other thing I will say, just as a final thought, is that I also kind of appreciated in this film that at the end of the day, it didn't take itself 100% seriously, which I can appreciate. I think it took itself a little too seriously in a lot of ways, but it wasn't but I could tell that there were just moments of levity and moments of, once again, just having some fun with it. And I appreciated that.
It wasn't like overly melodramatic. It could have been, but it wasn't.
To me, at some points it was, and some points it wasn't. I guess it kind of went back and forth a little bit for me, but I at least appreciated that it wasn't just like serious. So that helped the movie too. But overall, I thought it was an average movie. I enjoyed it. Parts of it I didn't feel like it really elevated my appreciation of film or gave me any sort of profound feelings or anything like that. But I'm glad I watched it, and I thought it was interesting to watch in 2023. And interestingly, we're kind of coming full circle here, right? With the geopolitical tensions, it's looking like the things are heating up again with Russia. So maybe it's time for
Creed 3 is coming out soon. Maybe Creed 4 will be again Creed versus Lundgren's son.
I don't know. Creed 2 was ahead of their time with bringing back Lundgren and having his son coming in there. So I guess they were ahead of time.
Did they already bring him back and his son?
The second one. Yeah,
dang,
Creed
they jumped
2.
the shark. Shoot.
Yeah.
But have you guys noticed, real quick, have you noticed that, have you seen the new Old Spice campaign with young Dolph Lundgren looking like Ivan
CG.
Drago?
They've been doing that for a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, has that been going on for a while?
Yeah, I think so.
I've
it
noticed
always freaks me out, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah, they're still running, and they're clearly channeling the
absolutely.
the Drago spirit with that campaign, which is kind of timely and interesting. All right, Well, I want to just say to everybody, first of all, please join us on Critical Mess again here in a couple weeks when we're going to be talking about the Star Wars film The Last Jedi, which is going to be, I'm going to guarantee you right here, right now, we're going to argue about it. We're going to be civil humans about it, but we are not going to agree on this film. So please tune in for a little bit of contention there. And please know that you guys can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, Anchor, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, and probably a bunch of stuff I've never even heard of. So thank you for listening, and we are deeply grateful if you made it this far and listened all the way to the end here. So we love that you listened to us. Thank you very much, and until next time.
All right, later.